All right. So welcome and thank you for coming to this event in the city's Sustainability Speaker Series. The Speaker Series is sponsored by the City of Sunnyvale as a way to expand community awareness on issues of sustainability, such as energy, waste, housing, and transportation. My name is Doug Kunz, and I'm a member of the Sustainability Commission. First of all, some thank yous. I'd like to thank the City Council for their vision and continuing sponsorship of the Speaker Series. And I do note that Council Member Nancy Smith is in the audience, so thank you for coming. And I saw Glenn Hendricks earlier. Do we have any other council members in attendance? Okay. Thank you for coming. It takes a lot of effort to put on events like this, and the staff at the Environmental Services Department have done a great job with planning this event and promoting it and supporting it, so I'd like to thank them. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you also to the Sustainability Commission and my co-members of the Sustainability Speaker Series Subcommittee. So that's Crystal Wickham and Steve Zornetzer, as well as other members of the commission who I see in the audience. I see Chair Bruce Payton over there, so thank you, Bruce. All right, and certainly last but not least, a big thank you to our speakers, who I will be introducing shortly. Before we dive into that, just a few reminders. First off, there are refreshments out in the lobby. Please make sure that you do not bring any food into the theater itself. Also, this is a zero waste event, so please dispose of your items in the proper bins outside. Please make sure that you turn off your cell phones so that you are not disturbing your fellow members of the audience if you get a call. This lecture is being audio recorded, so it will be available later in case you hear something that particularly makes a light bulb go off for you, or makes an EV rev, I guess. If you need to exit this room, please make sure that you just exit through one of the two doors at the back and not the ones at the side. The ones at the back are quite a bit quieter and less disruptive. Let's see. No food or drink in the theater. That got listed here a couple of times, so I think they're pretty serious about that. And last off, we value feedback, so please make sure that you fill out an evaluation form today before you go, so that we know how this event worked for you and get your thoughts about other topics that you would be interested in learning about. So with that, I'd like to introduce our speakers today, who are Jim Barbera, Marc Geller, and Jane Rosten. So Jim is an engineer at ChargePoint, which is the nation's largest EV charging company. Jim is versed in all aspects of EV life, including leasing, buying, charging, maintenance, and installing charging stations, as well as solar panels. He is now an experienced EV driver and has driven nearly all makes and models of EVs. Next up, Marc Geller. Marc is the co-founder and vice president of Plug-in America. And serves on the board of directors of the Electric Auto Association. Marc has been driving an electric car since 2001. That's impressive, and was an early EV advocate. He is familiar with many EVs, having driven approximately 250,000 electric miles. Last but not least is Jane Rosten, who is an environmental health program manager at Stanford University and a happy driver of an electric vehicle. Jane is highly experienced in helping people turn their good environmental intentions into action and applying principles of behavioral science when needed. So with that, let's welcome our panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Doug. And thank you, City of Sunnyvale. So wonderful to be here. So I want to welcome the audience and just say how thrilled I am that we can be here to help you understand this incredibly impactful topic for our planet or for just fun. You'll see as you go through this, there's many, many reasons to adopt an electric vehicle. And I just want to say that we've been teaching this class since 2015. We started at Stanford 4 years ago, and we've been presented at many times, various cities on the peninsula and companies. So today we are presenting from our own independent company, EVUcation, but we are still very connected with Stanford and very supportive of all their great work as well. I just want to also say that what was not mentioned when Marc's introduction came out, and I hope he's okay with me sharing this, is that he just drove to New York and back in a Tesla, and he made it happen. So that's one of the things that you're going to find out about how you work with these cars. Anyway, I want to just say that whatever your motivation is for being here, we welcome. Whether it's for just getting a great car, something that's fun, whether it's just wanting to have a good effect on the planet or on your own health because the air gets cleaner, whatever it is, or just curiosity. Those are all wonderful reasons. And we hope to just be your guides. There's no stupid question. We're going to just be very available to you to help you understand. I want to just ask you, if you could, please hold your questions until the end. We've given you all cards, little index cards, so that you can write some questions down. You don't have to turn those in. We'll just come and, talk to you when we get to the Q&A period, which we're going to allow substantial time for. And, in the meantime, you also, I hope everybody's got a handout, because you can certainly use the back of it or the last 2 pages for notes. Feel free to write down notes. And we are also, just afterwards, if you find that you have burning questions, we often are fine with you being able to email us after the class. So we'll make sure you know how to reach us. I just want to say that, we know that 41% of California's carbon footprint is from transportation. And, so this is such a big impact thing you can do. We'll talk more about that when we get to the environmental section. But with all these fires that we've just had, people start feeling such despair. And so this is something really impactful you can do. I'm also trained as a licensed clinical social worker and a psychotherapist. We're not going to have a therapy group in here, don't worry. But I do know that if we get people to turn their sadness and fear into action, it really, really helps that kind of trauma that we sometimes feel when we look around us. I also want to say that a couple years ago, Crystal from Sunnyvale saw one of our classes, and she was so instrumental in helping to bring it here. So she's not here right now, but she should be really acknowledged. So just let you know. Let's see. One more thing I wanted to say is that I feel like part of what goes on is that I personally ride a bike a lot. And for years I've been trying to get people to get out of their cars and be on bikes and so forth and so on. And at some point I finally recognized I had to acknowledge that not everybody feels they can ride a bike or wants to ride a bike. So, we just broadened and opened up and said, let's see how we can help support people going electric. And sometimes it's a real kind of a process. It can take you, sometimes people come to our classes 2 or 3 or 4 times, and then they do get a car a lot of times, but not always. And, sometimes people just, we did a survey about last year of all the people in our classes that took them, and found that 40% of our respondents had actually gotten a car within 6 months of taking the class. So that was very affirming. So anyway, I'm going to just stop babbling here and turn it over to my wonderful co-teachers. And please just stay connected to us and let us know what you need as we go forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. We'll go over the agenda here real quick. So I think we've taken care of the welcome and introductions. We'll go into our firsthand experiences of our sort of personal preferences for why we prefer electric cars. Then we kind of go over some of the car types and models. And then we'll talk about sort of what's the same and what's different in the nuts and bolts section. And then we'll cover the economics of going EV and how much money and time you can save. There's a big time element, surprisingly. And then Jane will focus on some of the environmental benefits. It's really huge. And then we'll wrap it up at the end with some action items you guys might want to try to take. So go ahead, Jane. Why do you drive electric?
Why I drive electric. Now, my main reason, as you probably could imagine, was my issue was the environment. But now I also found out how fun these cars are to drive. And I can report to you that they are so incredibly inexpensive. There is no maintenance to speak of. We're going to get to that. But I've just been amazed that in the 4 years I've had my car, it's been into the service center once to have a taillight replaced just recently, and a couple software updates that any car with a computer may have to go in for, so it's not specific to electric. That's it. No spark plugs, no oil change, no tune-up, no smog check. Done.
What about?
Pardon?
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say so that's the lower maintenance. The instant throttle response, what my engineer friends call, oh my God, the torque on these cars, is amazing. And I'm, kind of a mellow person who's used to slow bike riding, so to speak. I have discovered my own inner Mustang Sally. I mean, sometimes I get such a kick, I acknowledge, out of being able to pass somebody really fast in the lane next to me who thinks, oh, that little Fiat could never, do that. But it really does bring out some of that in some of us. So anyway, this is one of the highest impact and easy steps we can take to reduce our carbon pollution. And then, as Jim has pointed out many times, it's very convenient. You can fuel them at home, work, or anywhere there's electricity. Part of what we're doing here right now, and it's in the title of our talk, there's a lot of mythology out there, and we are busting some myths today. So, thank you.
What about you, Mark? Do you have any? Do you have a personal EV story that you might want to share with us?
Yeah. Well, as you can hear me. No? Maybe this is working. I'll use this one. Now it's working. As Doug said, I first got into an electric car in 2001, and my reasons were, in fact, overtly political. If people can remember back to 2001, we had, in the 90s, had a war with Iraq, and oil seemed to be a big factor in it, and oil companies seemed to have a rather noxious effect on not only the environment, but our own political system. And came 2001, and there were, had been in the 90s and now into the 2000s demonstrations, and people tended to be holding up signs that said, no blood for oil, but 95% of them had driven a car with gasoline to get there. And so I started to look into what the alternatives were, and rather quickly found out that there was this thing called an electric car. California had made a small attempt to begin rolling out electric cars at the end of the 90s. And so I made every effort I could, got into one of the last of the electric cars from that original rollout, which is well documented in the movie Who Killed the Electric Car, which, if you haven't seen, is a documentary that I think might still be available on Netflix, but is well worth watching. And you'll see me 20 years ago.
Thanks, Mark. For me, I'm a car guy, so I've owned a number of cars with large V8 engines, and I had my fun with that. And it's not like I'm atoning for my conspicuous fuel consumption. EVs are just more fun. So there's that. And yeah, just the convenience. And as an engineer, it just seems silly to me to be throwing away, 80 cents of every dollar I put into the tank out the radiator and brakes as heat that's not doing anybody any good. So it just seemed silly that we now can make this switch easily. It's convenient. There's not any kind of compromise you need to make. It's really just a better experience on all levels. So I'm going to ask a few questions. I'd like to get a read of our audience because this helps us sort of refine the talk as we go along. How many of you, yeah, I got to switch it over here. How many of you commute daily by car? Okay, that's good. A lot of you don't. That's interesting. So how many of you work out of your homes or are retired? Okay, that's interesting. How many of you live in a multifamily building? You know, like an apartment or a condo? Okay. It's hard to say. Oh, that's much better. Okay, good. How many of you are near, are you aware of any public charging available near where you live? Wow, there's a lot of awareness here. That's very interesting. We'll touch on that later. How many of you take regular road trips, you know, like in excess of 200, 250 miles? Okay. Are they to the same place every time, or are they in different, are you adventurous and do you go to different places every time? How many go to different places every time? Oh, a lot of people. Okay. Outside the state? Okay, that's good. How many skiers do we have? All right, there's an EV for you. How many of you enjoy going to gas stations? Oh, come on. Anyway, like getting your oil changed, smog checks, tune-ups, all that. Do you like doing that? Like spending time? Oh, there's one. Okay, cool. Excellent. Okay, good. So we know kind of what subjects we want to spend more time on. So that's good to know. So it looks like we need to cover road trips. We need to cover the people who might not necessarily have workplace EV charging. Okay. So now we'll get into the cars. That's you, Mark.
Oh, come on. Okay, let me continuing asking questions here. Who doesn't know what the difference is between an all-electric car and a plug-in hybrid and a hybrid? Okay, some people, okay. So let's start with just a hybrid. Back in, a few years ago when I would ask the question, who here has driven an electric car? A lot of people would say, oh, I drive an electric car. And it was a Prius or a Honda. And it was a car that, had some electric component, and they had been convinced perhaps by the manufacturer that it was an electric car. But it was a car that wouldn't go without gasoline. And so for my purposes and for our purposes and your purposes going forward, a hybrid that doesn't have a plug on it is not an electric car. An electric car is a car that you can plug into the wall and get juice to move the car with electricity. So there are two kinds of electric cars that we're talking about here, and they're both represented here with a little bit of a diagram. The all-electric battery electric vehicle and a plug-in hybrid. So a battery electric vehicle only runs on electricity. If you don't plug it in, you're not going anywhere. A plug-in hybrid has both an engine and can take gasoline and can take electricity. So if you can't give up the warm, cuddly feeling of going to a gas station, a plug-in hybrid is the car for you. And there are certain folks for whom a plug-in hybrid is a logical vehicle. And the most important thing you've got to figure out really as you consider going forward to purchase or lease one of these kinds of cars is to figure out which kind of car is right for you, how far you need to go, how many cars does your family have. And those kinds of questions will answer whether a plug-in hybrid or an all-electric car is right for you.
And Mark, could I just quickly say, inside your handout on the second page is a little self-assessment that you can use at some point to help you decide that question.
Yeah, and let me at this point, I might as well say, there's I'm involved with, I'm on the board of directors of a nonprofit organization called Plug in America, and one of the things that we've created is a program called Plug Star. And if you go to plugstar.com on the web, it's a tool to help you also decide what car makes sense for you based on how far you need to go every day, whether you have electricity available in your garage, and that sort of thing. So, and it's on your handout. So, the thing to know about battery electric cars, there are battery electric cars that go, 70 miles with a full charge, and there are battery electric cars that go 350 or more miles. Plug-in hybrids, There are plug-in hybrids that go about 10 miles on electricity, and then as far as you want on a full tank of gas. And there are plug-in hybrids that go up to 100 miles on electricity before the car seamlessly switches to gasoline. How do I do this?
If I see you flip the slide, I'll flip the slide up here.
Okay, so here and on the handout that was available from Plug-in America out at the table, you'll see most of the cars that are available, electric cars and plug-in hybrids. Oh, I see where we are. So going backwards, can you go backwards?
There's a missing slide.
Oh, is there? Okay, oh, there it is.
They split the order.
They switched the order. So here you can see, you know, electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids of almost all sorts and configurations. There are some obvious sorts of cars that are missing. We're still waiting for a pickup truck. And you know, America loves pickup trucks, and I expect pickup trucks will happen soon. But at this point, there's a large variety of sedans, from small to large, from the Fiat to the Tesla Model S, and everything in between. And
there's some that are like SUVs.
there we go. And so here you can sort of see the range of the different models. And again, you just need to figure out what it is you need. You know, the Teslas are at the extreme high end generally. And then there are cars that are, you know, like the Fiat at this point gets about, 84 miles?
However, I get 100.
If you drive like Jane, you get 100. But again, the important thing isn't, don't presume that you want a car that has the biggest battery and can go as far as a battery could take you, because you're just paying for battery you might not need if what you want is a car that drives you, you know, to Costco and back, or to school and back, or to church and back a couple of times a week. So afterwards, you can ask us. We all have great experience with all of these vehicles. And so when we get to the question and answer period, if you've got specific questions about specific vehicles, don't hesitate to ask us. We'll be able to answer them. I'll let Jim now carry on about charging and all the other nuts and bolts involved.
And let me just quickly
Thanks,
say
Mark.
one thing, Jim, one moment, is one of the things I did that some of you might find helpful is I had my gas car, it was 25 years old, and it would have, 90,000 miles on it because I was mostly a bicyclist, and I just was very attached to it. So, the idea of leasing a car or just even going electric was a little scary for me when I first considered it. But what I did was I held on to my gas car for about, I would say, 3 to 5 months after I got my electric car, while I was learning and getting used to it and so forth and so on. And then the new car, the new Fiat, whose name is Celeste, by the way, became so compelling, I just felt like it was helping me say I could let go of my gas car. So there you have it.
I have a similar story. I kept my gas car for about 3 or 4 months, and I think I put all of 10 miles on it before finally selling it. So yeah, on to sort of what's different. I think one of the biggest fundamental differences is that the range of a gas car is roughly in the same neighborhood, depending on which, regardless of which car you drive, where the range of an EV can vary widely depending on which one you buy. So the other thing I want to illustrate with this slide is EVs are actually nothing new. I forget exactly when, but there was a point in our history where there were actually more electric vehicles on the road. Jane, you have something to say?
Just to talk a little into the mic a little
Okay.
bit. Yeah, there you go.
There were actually more. There was a point where there were actually a greater number of electric vehicles on the road than there were gas cars. And she looks like she's ready for an outing. So there was actually charging stations at home and vehicles you could drive every day. So yeah, it drives like a normal car. There's really nothing different. It behaves much like an automatic transmission car. Most of them, even though it's really not necessary, this is sort of a carryover, and they wanted the experience to be familiar. But you pull up to a light and you've got your foot on the brake, and if you let go, the car will actually creep forward, even though it really doesn't need to. A lot of the newer cars now, they're figuring out that, oh, it's actually better just to not have it creep forward, so you can actually flip it into a mode where it'll stay put. You use the same gas and brake pedal, but there's just no shifting, no noise, no drama under the hood. So otherwise, that's pretty much it. Braking, I've leased cars and driven 45,000 miles on one of them and returned it in, and the brake shoes were still at 100%, so the brakes will last the life of the car.
Yeah, I was just going to intrude here to mention regenerative braking and see if people know what regenerative braking is. Not so much? Oh, half the people. Okay, just to be clear, so the reason that his brakes were not worn out when he returned the car was because an electric car has regenerative braking. And you can think of it as the motor spinning backwards when you take your foot off the accelerator pedal, and it slows the car down. And instead of all of that energy dissipating in waste heat, it literally fills the battery back up. So like when you go down a really long hill, like out of San Francisco into Marin or something, you can actually see the mileage available in your battery tick up. And I don't know, for me, once that started happening, I just thought, this is really awesome. No gas car creates gasoline on the fly, but an electric car literally refills the battery instead of braking. So you save on brakes, and you get this little extra juice along the way.
Yeah, you notice it a lot when you go over the hill to Santa Cruz. So the ride down is pretty much free. It's pretty awesome. Yeah, any motor can be a generator, and so that's what happens, right? You either hit the brakes or you just coast, and you're recharging the battery on the way down a hill. So that's kind of nice. The wiper blades, washer fluid, rotate your tires, some software updates. The first time I brought my Ford Focus Electric in back in 2012, and I brought it in for a software update, and the service advisor comes out, and he's got his little clipboard, and he looks up and he goes, "Oh, that's the car that's going to put me out of business." Poor guy. I kind of felt sorry for him. I said, "Well, no, I'll still come in for tire rotations," and I tried to make him feel a little bit better. But yeah, there's really not much to do in these things. Even the temperatures under the hood are a lot lower. There's nothing that could ever burn you. There's no hot exhaust. There's no risk of fires or anything like that, any more than there would be in a gas car. So now we talk about how you would drive this car and the day in the life of an EV owner would be. Something different than would be with a gas car, right? So you don't have to stop and go someplace special to fuel your car if you have the ability to fuel it at home or work. If you don't have the ability to fuel it at home or work, well, then there are plenty of public charging stations in the grocery stores, in the shopping center parking lots, and out and around. And those can fill your car at different rates, and we'll touch on that a little bit later about the kind of charging stations you would find in public. But every car comes with the ability to fuel it. So in the trunk, there's Mark's Tesla charger. This is similar to the one that came in my car. So the day you drive it off the lot, as long as you have an available plug somewhere, you can plug this car in and charge it. Now, it's not the fastest. You're going to add about 4 miles for every hour you're plugged in. But if you plug it in, when you get home from work or after dinner, you'll put about 40, 50 miles in the car overnight. So if that's all you drive in a day, that could work for you. If you want to upgrade, and if speed is more important to you, then you can upgrade to a 240 volt charging station. We'll touch on what those look like later on. And there are companies that specialize in charging stations for multifamily buildings, apartments, condos, and the like. So there are solutions out there for that as well. Charging outside the home, well, you've got your workplace charging, your public charging stations, and we'll touch on what the road trip looks like. But there's really, and especially in this area, there's really no lack of ability to charge. I think to Marc's point, has made this point that a lot of people, before they get an EV, they kind of, sorry for stealing your thunder, but they hand wring and fret a lot over oh my God, there's no place to charge the car. And actually, once you own the car or lease the car and you're actually driving it every day, you realize it's just not that big a deal, especially around here in the Bay Area. We're very lucky and very fortunate to have just zillions of places to charge. It's really, really easy. You were going to say something?
Yeah, I'll also say, sometimes people think, boy, I better get my charging situation together before I get the car. And if you've got access to power where you park your car, you've got a garage or there's just get the car. And it's because as long as you can plug it into 120 volts, you may find that you want it to charge quicker, or if you've got a particularly long commute every day, that it's not charging your car enough. But the kind of untold secret is that, 40 or 50% of the people who get a plug-in car just use 120 volt power. It sounds and seems painfully slow, but the truth is it takes 2 seconds to plug in the car, and when you come back, the car is a lot fuller, particularly if it's the next day. So you really can get a car, plug it into the wall, and then determine whether or not you need to spend another $500 or $1,000 to put in a level 2 charging station so that you could fully recharge a big battery overnight, for example.
And as a complete demonstration of that very idea, one of our classes that we had a couple of years ago at Stanford, Marc actually plugged in his car into the lobby of our building. So there's this long cord coming out, and we went and taught the class, and we hung out for a while, and he came back, and he had another 20 miles. So it really does happen.
So that's it. Most of the time we do these classes, it's in a place where there's a plug on the wall, and I just like to illustrate, like if you could wheel the car in here, you could plug it in right here and charge the car. So it's actually quite easy. And, of course, there's an app for that, actually several apps. For doing this. There's a number of companies that have apps. PlugShare is kind of the go-to. It's really pretty user-friendly, and they have a desktop and a smartphone app. Of course, the company I work for has one also, and it's probably not going to show you all the stations. They don't include home stations, for example. PlugShare does. If you have a charging station at your home and you're willing to share it, you can actually post it on PlugShare. I think that's their original purpose for being founded. And so both these companies, and there's another one. What was the other one, Mark?
ChargeWay.
ChargeWay, yes. And so download the apps or go online. And these are helpful for planning your route and saying, oh, well, I want to take this car outside its range. What are my options for charging? So it's kind of handy to have that available. If you're in a Tesla, is my understanding, you really all the information you need to get to your destination is built into the car because they're the only car company that actually built their own charging infrastructure. So is that correct, Mark?
Yeah, Tesla makes it very easy. As I demonstrated to some people I was driving around earlier, you could kind of talk into the car and say, navigate to Yosemite, and, it then chews on it for a little bit, and up it comes, and it says, okay, you should stop in Concord for a half an hour, and then stop in some town I never heard of for 35 minutes, and you got enough charge, and it'll tell you how much charge you will arrive at that location with, and this all works. I mean, it really works.
I'll say this. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that in an electric car, you can go from here to New York or from here to anywhere as fast as you could in a gas car. You're going to spend a little bit more time in Radiator Springs, but if that's your goal, get on a plane or rent a gas car. But it's really, my wife and I recently went to Mendocino, and we spent exactly 0 additional minutes charging our car. There was charging available in all the places we want to go, including state parks. So a number of state parks have installed charging stations, and we went and hiked the old-growth redwood forest, enjoyed some fresh air, and when we came back, we had a completely full battery. So you can take a 200-mile trip, and when you get there, you still have 200 miles in the battery ready to go. So at any given time, we could have gotten a call and we needed to come home for something. It was no big deal. We could have turned around and done it. I do recommend when you get your EV that you take that trip to Mendocino. Highway 128 is just absolutely gorgeous. So.
And let me say one real quick thing too, Jim. If you find after you take that little self-assessment inside your handout, or you do the one that Mark mentioned on Plug in America, and you find, you're taking 3 trips a year or something like that, 3, long road trips, you may just decide, for all the other driving I'm doing around town, I can just really help the environment, help my pocketbook and so forth. And for those 3 trips a year, I will rent a car. And even some of the dealerships give you vouchers for rental cars as part of an incentive. So
the question I get asked most often is, how long does it take to charge? And the answer is always, that depends. It depends on a number of factors, but it actually ends up getting very simple. The 2 biggest factors are how big your battery is and how empty your battery is. And then the third one, of course, is what type of charging you're plugging into, right? And so the big 3 numbers you're going to see, the cord that comes with the car will add 4 miles for every hour you're plugged in, right? So, and by the way, all these cars have the equivalent of a gas gauge. It's not like you're flying blind and you have no idea how full or empty your battery is. Some tell you in terms of, they all tell you exactly how many miles you have. So the odds that you're going to get stranded, I've actually never been stranded. I've never had to call for help or a tow or anything like that. And I'm not in Mark's league. I've only logged about 100,000 electric miles. But it's just never really been an issue. So the car gets very annoying about warning you when your battery is getting low. It's like, okay, you really better find a charging station now. And it's, of course, all sorts of bells and lights go off. Then you move up to a level 2 charging station, which you can see in the public realm. You would have something it's a post about this high, and it's got a couple of plugs on it, and it's tied to a higher energy electric power source. And then, of course, when you're in road trip mode, then you're kind of back to the gas station fueling model. And so you're going to these DC fast chargers, where those are fortunately located along most highway rest stops, and you can find them on the apps that I mentioned earlier. And those are going to get you somewhere between 100 and 500 miles for every hour you're plugged in, depending on what kind of car you have and how big your battery is. So the good news with all these is there's options and there's apps, and it's actually pretty easy to do. The thing I want to point out here is with the DC chargers, the power conversion from AC to DC actually happens much in the same way a gas pump does. When I'm charging my Chevy Bolt EV, I get the first 100 miles comes in about 15 minutes. The second 100 miles takes another 45 minutes. So as the battery gets full, the speed at which the charge happens is a little bit lower, right? So that's something to be mindful of if you're planning a road trip. But in the time it takes us to eat a veggie burger or whatever, we're pretty much ready to go. This is our little road trip we took, and again, this is sort of the round trip to Mendocino and how it happens, and it's just actually very easy. There was no waiting around for the car to charge or anything like that. And again, if you don't drive a Tesla, I'm not going to sit here and tell you don't need to plan. You do need to plan. So, but the good news is it doesn't take a long time. I mean, I think I spent about a half an hour or 20 minutes in front of the computer and just kind of plotted out and sort of said, okay, yeah, we can charge here. Here's an option. Here's a backup. The thing you need to plan for, of course, is the charging station may be occupied by another car or a bunch of cars, and you may have to wait a little bit. I've never run into that, but I've heard of people running into it. And go ahead, Jane.
I just want to quickly say that at the risk of sounding like, a preacher or moralistic, which I do not want to sound like, sometimes what I would go through if I would have to do some planning like that and start feeling annoyed with the whole process, I would really remind myself of we know, what is this little teensy bit of, quote, inconvenience when I think about people who are suffering the consequences of climate change, the inconvenience of people who are having floods and tsunamis, and the list goes on, and it would be very humbling. So again, not to put any guilt on anybody, but that was mine.
Thank you, Jane. The one point I want to make is that not every car comes with the ability to charge DC fast. So when you are looking to buy or lease the car, make sure that that checkbox is checked if that's your planned use for the car. If you plan to use the car for road trips, be sure that the car comes with the DC port option. Most cars it's standard, but for example, the Chevrolet Bolt, I think it's a $750 option. You have to pay for it when you buy or lease the car. Make sure it comes with that. The other thing that I also recommend is not every car on the base model level comes with heated seats. So make sure you get whatever comfort package comes with the car that provides heated seats, because the heater will suck your range down faster than anything. It'll chop probably 20 to 30% of your range off if you run it continuously. So the good news is these cars have heated seats, and then you can, I've never been cold in the car. Some of the cars have heated wheels. I never thought that would be a big deal, but it really is nice. So just be sure that to check those two boxes, if you decide to take the plunge. And then there's more places to charge. So yeah, they're bringing in EV Go and Chevron are bringing EV charging to gas stations. So you're going to see more EV chargers actually where the gas stations are. So that's kind of nice. And as we alluded to earlier, most of your EV charging is going to happen where you live, where you sleep. And it's going to happen while you're not driving the car, right? The car's sitting in the garage anyway, and so you're just adding the miles while you're eating, sleeping, watching TV, or whatever you're doing, right? Or at work. That's sort of the second most convenient place to charge. I do a little bit of both. My workplace just turned on free charging for employees, so now everybody's charging there, and I say, well, you know what? Let them do it. I'll just charge at home. I'm happy to pay the 12 cents a kilowatt hour or whatever it is to charge my car. And again, this is the 120 volt charge cord, and this again comes with every car. So I think we covered that sufficiently. But yeah, you're going to add about 40 miles overnight, and that may be all you need. If you're in public with this thing, be careful, because if it's an outlet that might not be dedicated specifically for EV charging, it might be shared with other outlets, and somebody else might have a car plugged in, and the circuit might not be able to support two cars at the same time. So you run a little bit of risk there. But in places where you see an outlet specifically installed for the purpose of EV charging, go for it. And it's free, and why not? So of course, then you want to think about, okay, if you want to set up a charging station at home, well, these are some options. Unfortunately, you really can't walk into a store and buy these things. Home Depot was carrying them for a while. I think Lowe's was carrying them for a while. I think Costco, you can still get a couple of different models at Costco. Most of them are available online, Amazon or what's the other, or Costco.com. What's the other one? HomeDepot.com, yeah. So the websites that for the major retailers, you can order any of them from there. They're going to run you somewhere between $400 to $600, depending on which model you get. The one advantage to having level 2 at home that I find kind of nice is that it's supplying enough energy to the car so that the cars, most of them have timers in them. And you can say, okay, every morning I'm going to get up and go to work at 7 a.m. And not only will it start the car, but it'll actually start the heater or air conditioning to make sure the car is at the right temperature, the interior is at the right temperature, so you get into a nice, warm, cozy car. And that can help there. Some are networked, meaning they're actually Wi-Fi and they're connected to the whole Internet of Things, if that's what you want to do. That's what that little graph represents. So that's actually my usage, and you can see how many kilowatt hours I use every month, or I could flip it over and see how much it's costing me. It costs me about $40 a month. And then there's some where they're not networked. You just plug them in and you go. But be aware that the car, if you drive 30, 40 miles a day, will likely be the single largest consumer of electricity in your house. So it will use more, one of my EVs uses more electricity than my house it does in a month. And you think, oh my God, that's horrible. Well, actually it's great because it's saving about 3 to 4x that amount of energy in gas. Remember, you're not buying any gas anymore. So you have to decide amongst yourselves which type you want to go with. Jane, you had something?
Yeah, just real quick, we'll talk about this more when we get to incentives, but just to remember too that if you do put in some charging infrastructure in your home, many people can get a tax write-off. There's a right written into the IRS, and we're hoping that we will maintain that.
Yeah, a number of municipalities are running incentives for rebates on not only the cost of the charger, but the cost of the electrical work. Now I'm going to kind of dive into the weeds here a little bit and just sort of say, okay, if you have a panel with the screw-in fuses and it looks like something out of a Frankenstein movie, maybe you want to think about getting a panel upgrade. Those typically run about $3,500. So that's kind of worst case scenario, right? If you don't have and when the electrician is out, he'll swap the panel out, and they'll also put the circuit for the charging station in your house, in your garage, and locate it wherever you think it would be most convenient so the cord will reach the maximum number of spaces. If your panel is full, don't despair. There's this lovely little device they're now selling at Home Depot, which actually you replace 2 circuit breakers with the same 2-pole circuit breaker, and it replaces the 2 that are there, and then it also adds the correct amperage circuit for the EV charger. So that's like $27 or whatever. But while your electrician is out there, I'm going to make a plug, pun intended, for getting some other work done as well, and that is have them put in the circuit for the heat pump water heater, because that's something that'll save you a lot of energy as well, and maybe even run the circuit for the electric stove or induction cooktop. So yeah, so you'll need a charger will run about $300 to $600. Cost of installation, I've seen it as cheap as $600. Of course, we always assume you're going to get a permit because the city not only wants the job done right, but they actually want to know how many people are driving EVs. And this is really important because they want to make sure and keep their electric infrastructure up to date. I live in Palo Alto. We have a city-owned utility, and I got a letter saying, we just learned you're driving an EV, and I wrote them back, and I said, well, guess what? I actually have 3 now, so you update your records, please. Okay, so now we're going to get into the EV economics.
Okay.
This is a word that our other teacher, who is in Spain right now, made up, Sven Thiessen. Some of you know him. He's what we call an EV angelist and has been promoting this for years. He'll be back in August, and he will be joining our team.
So here's a little joke just to begin it. If you notice, I mean, this gas station obviously thought it was being clever, but it was clever in ways they didn't quite intend it, right? It's proven no gas gets better mileage.
As an EV driver, I couldn't interpret it any other way, but that's me.
Oh, you have to do it, right? Yeah. Okay. So, the question really is, people say EVs are for rich people, right? And electric cars at first seemed a little more expensive than your average gas car. And certainly the news was all about Tesla, and Tesla seemed to be selling $100,000 cars, and most people don't buy $100,000 cars. But the reality is that, though the price of an electric car, an equivalent electric car, the MSRP at first might look more expensive, if you look at it a little bit more deeply, you deal with the incentives that are available and the cost of the car over time due to the lower maintenance costs and lower fuel costs. You very quickly get to the point where you realize an equivalent electric car is going to cost you less money, that you will actually save money by getting an electric car. I often think about a person who might get and we'll get into used electric cars, but get a used electric car. They used to have an old gas car, and it was getting 10 or 15 or 20 or 25 miles per gallon. And as soon as they switch to an electric car and plug it in at home, they're going to save $100 or $200 a month on their commute. And we are in an era today where a lot of people, school teachers, for example, they're not getting raises regularly. And it's very difficult. People just don't see raises happening. Well, if you can cut the cost of your transportation by $100 or $200 a month, that might be the best place to find a little extra change in your pocket. And I think electric cars, when you explore the cost over time, you will find out that, in fact, an electric car is cheaper. And this goes to sort of demonstrate that fact, right? The cost of a Bolt, in this case, after you get incentives like the federal tax credit and the California state rebate and the rebate offered by an electric utility in PG&E territory, for example, and that includes people who are who are on a CCA, Peninsula Clean Power or something. They get $800 when they get a new EV. So this stuff starts to add up, so that the cost of the electric car, even when you lease it or purchase it, might well be lower than the equivalent gas car, and certainly when you start to figure in maintenance and fuel costs, you're at a lower cost car. There's a question of whether to lease or buy. And there's a lot of type here. I don't know, maybe you want to take a picture of it because I'm not going to go through all of it. But the question is, should you lease the car or should you buy the car? And my rule of thumb is, with 90 to 95% of the people who get a plug-in car at this point, they lease it. And they lease it for a couple of reasons. The basic one is I don't want to say the technology is changing so rapidly, but certainly batteries are improving at a rate of about 7% a year, so that by the time your 3-year lease is up, there's going to be a lot more options. And you're also going to know a lot more, you'll have a better idea of what you really need in your next electric car. So I do highly encourage folks to consider leasing their car. As long as you get a car that has a 30-month lease, you're eligible for the California state rebate. And as long as you negotiate well with your dealer, you will get a significant portion of the federal $6,500 tax credit included in the lease. If you buy the car, that's something you have to do on your own IRS forms when you file your taxes. But this is a way to not have to deal with that complication.
Quickly, Mark, I also just want to say for those who have trouble seeing this, I forgot to mention that we are going to be sending everybody who signed in an electronic version of the online resources that's in your handout, and you will click right on those links.
So, and after the 3 years are up, if you lease the car, you have the option of buying the car. But because of the weird way leases are written, I've known people who who loved their car, decided not to purchase it from the dealer, but found that very same car available for less money than they would have had to have paid to purchase the car after the lease. I mean, lease economics and all this stuff is a little confusing. I certainly don't really understand it, but do a little research and there are deals to be had.
And one more thing to just say, I did that very thing. I leased my car for 3 years. I fell in love with Celeste, and so at the end of the lease, I found a way to actually get a dealer bought my car. I turned it into a dealer and then was able to buy the car back from the dealer at a very much lower price than the so-called residual.
Okay, there are various leasing tips, and I think everyone knows somebody who really knows this stuff in detail and has tactics and strategies for dealing with auto dealers who have a reputation that's probably well earned. I would just simply say, if you're leasing the car, spend some time negotiating and get somebody to go in with you if you're not a comfortable negotiator who will do it for you. There are deals to be had, but you've got to, recognize you're talking about an auto dealer. So pay attention, because they'll take what they can, and you want to get the fair end of the deal.
So that right-hand column, it didn't really line up on this version so well. It looked good on my computer, but anyway. The right-hand column is my actual lease that I did in 2017 for my Chevrolet Bolt. So the two numbers that I just want to illustrate, the total of what I paid to the dealer was $13,800 to drive roughly a $43,000 car for 3 years. After I got the $2,500 rebate and a Costco rebate and the PG&E rebate, it came down to $10,124 to drive a car for 3 years. So that worked out pretty well. So those are the numbers roughly. If you're going to lease an EV for 3 years, somewhere in the $10,000 to $15,000 is what you're going to pay to the dealer, and somewhere in the low $10,000 range is what you'll pay to drive the car for 3 years. Now there are some other cars that when they're closing out the model series, you can find some really amazing deals.
Like my car was like $6,500 in some markets, so amazing, because it starts out at 33.
And there are tricks to dealing with dealers. I mean, I think you're better off buying your car at the end of the month when they have incentives from their corporate offices. So there's all kinds of games to be played there. So then there's a question about getting new or used cars. And there are obviously lots of incentives to getting a new car, but there are lots of good reasons to get a used car. And while folks who have purchased a new electric vehicle, as with people who purchase a new gasoline vehicle, they bemoan how much the depreciation on that car is very quickly. I mean, it's 10 or 20% as soon as you drive it out of the showroom. That also means that for people who are buying a used car, there are deals to be had. The cars have depreciated a lot, but that doesn't mean that the car isn't a really good car for you. And today, because we've gone through a period where the range on all-electric cars in particular has gone up so dramatically, the first 3 or 4 years, the electric cars kind of topped out at 100 miles, excepting Tesla, putting that to the side. And now you can get, 250 miles range in a Chevrolet. So the choices are much greater, but it also means that those used cars that are getting between 75 and 125 miles range are really quite reasonable. And so someone who's using a car for commuting or really doing local driving and doesn't need to drive 100 miles away and isn't worried about the whole range issue, you can get a really great car that's going to end up costing you a lot less to do the just quotidian stuff that you do with a car. My partner's father just bought a 3-year-old Leaf for a little over $10,000. So that was a $35,000 car. It's 3 years old. It's still under the warranty that guarantees that if the battery were to have some kind of catastrophic failure, they'd replace it. It's a really good deal. And I know people who have purchased used electric cars to do their short commutes for $4,000 or $5,000. And all it takes is one repair on a 15 or 20-year-old gas beater that you're using to commute to ruin the economics of that cheap gas car. So really consider used. In many markets, there are now some incentives for used cars. Our organization has spent a long time trying to get the state to offer incentives for people who buy used electric cars. There weren't any for a long time, and what we found was used electric cars were leaving the state of California and ending up in Norway, where they have had tremendous incentives to get electric cars, and at this point, well more than half of the car sales are electric cars, and people understand the value, particularly of a low-cost electric car. So here's an example on Craigslist of a couple of cars that are available that might surprise you. A 2012 Tesla for $27,000, a Nissan Leaf for $4,900, and I'm sure there are some for less than that. As with all used cars, maybe get it checked out at a dealer. If you're looking at a used Leaf, there's a really wonderful little app you can buy called Leaf Spy, so that you can plug the car, sort of plug into the diagnostic port on the car and get a reading of the state of health of the battery, for example, at a much more granular level than is available simply on the dashboard. So, again, I think one thing I would say is I think, coming to this class and talking to us about this makes a lot of sense, but the Bay Area is covered with people who drive electric cars and plug-in hybrid cars. And for the most part, they never tire of talking about the experience and generally love their car. So ask questions. You got a particular question that occurs to you after you've left this class, find somebody, even at the shopping mall, who you see their car plugged in, ask them the question. They'll probably give you the answer. The question always, people say, how much is your electric bill going to go up? And yes, your electric bill will go up. It will go up, 1/3 of what your gasoline bill went down, right? So, what will appear on your electric bill used to appear on your credit card charges, and you may or may not have ever counted up how much you're spending on gasoline, but 2/3 of that cost will go away. And you should know that PG&E, for example, all the electric utilities pretty much have special electric vehicle charging rates to incentivize folks to get electric cars and to make sure that they've got a time when they can charge their electric car at the lowest possible rate. So right now, between, I think it's 11 a.m. and 11 p.m. and 7 a.m., you can get electricity on an electric vehicle rate for 12.5 cents a kilowatt hour, which, if you live in Oregon, it's expensive, but if you live here, it's cheap. So you just got to explore with your electric utility how to find the best rate structure for you. And now I think we will turn it over to Jane to give us a little bit of the environmental benefits of electric cars.
Thank you, Mark. So, the elephant in the garage. This is one of our favorite slides. And the reason that we have this elephant in the garage, Jim, do you want to just share real quickly what you were thinking when you put that?
Well, the thing is that your vehicle is not something that is fueled in the home or used in the home, so it's often not factored into your household energy footprint, right? Your greenhouse gas footprint or your energy budget or whatever you want to call it, right? But it is actually the single biggest consumer of energy in your home, by far. All the LED bulbs and weather stripping and caulking and energy efficient appliances and all that is wonderful. Go ahead and do it. But the one that's really going to move the needle bigger than any other thing is electrifying your transportation. I actually want to call out someone in our audience. His name is Mohan Mahal. And San Jose Mercury did a piece on him several years ago. I forget what year it was, but he built a home, and it was an energy-efficient home, net zero energy, and he, of course, completed the puzzle by putting a Tesla in the garage for the buyer of that home. So this is the guy who gets it, right? So when you think about what you can do to improve the energy efficiency of your home, switch your transportation to electric.
Next. Okay. This is, for those of you, some of you are scientists and you've seen this before, some of you have heard about it, but this slide shows that for so many years, many years, our planet had a very relatively stable climate. Hard to believe, but it's true. And then just in the last 200 years, say 150 years, things started to really change. Now, before I go further with that thought, tell me, what do you think happened about 150 years ago that might explain that? I hear some good historians out there. We had the Industrial Revolution. So I want to just say this is a famous slide. There's a gentleman who's a great guy, Dr. Mann from Penn State University, who made this very, very famous, and it gets called the hockey stick graph because you've got that long period of stability, and then suddenly you've got the shape of a hockey stick going up. Next. And here's another eye-opening piece of things. This is showing that 41% of our carbon footprint in California, and actually most of the country, is coming from transportation. And people don't always think that. They think it's something else. So this is part of why it is so impactful for you to do something about your transportation. Go back to that for a sec. I just want to say that this, 2 years ago, we had their previous version, and that number down there was 39%. So it's continuing to tick up. And, you know, the important thing is that in 2018, it was the first time in the whole country where this part of the sector exceeded the industrial one. So it really is a biggie. Thank you. Okay, and this one is really interesting. Some of you have those questions about, but you know, what about all the energy it takes to produce the car and to, you know, what about if you're in a coal state? If you have to get your energy from coal? Well, even in a state where you're getting your energy from coal, you are still ahead of what you're going to have from a regular internal combustion engine car. And it's the Union of Concerned Scientists has really looked into this. They're cited at the bottom. So you don't have to really worry, but you see right over here that 45% of the best parts of our places to have EVs are actually, you know, better than the 50 mile per gallon car.
So in California, you're in one of the best regions.
Exactly. And if you're in, you know, if you're in Palo Alto, you really have a good deal because you'll see that in a moment. Going. So in this slide, you can see that this is all about the batteries. We get a lot of questions about batteries, have for years. And so it's not perfect. We acknowledge that's an issue, but it's really continuing to get better. And Jim, help me. Feel free to jump in here.
Does anybody here live in Palo Alto? That's you. You're driving it. That's you driving an EV.
Yeah, right. Help them understand.
That's your carbon footprint compared to a gas car, that top bar.
You see how this graph is? It's a little bit wonky, so we apologize for that, but all that up at the top with the gasoline car, what you've got, I don't have my cursor here, but vehicle tailpipe is what that big gold part of the graph is, the bar graph. And then down here at the bottom with your BEV, battery electric vehicle, you've got nothing basically, no tailpipe emissions.
You do have the manufacturing impact, which
Right.
is the same no matter where you are, right? The thing I do point out is the gas cars are a little more environmentally friendly to manufacture, but you can see the impact on the vehicle tailpipe of the overall footprint over the life cycle of the vehicle.
And there's more and more things happening to use those batteries, to recycle them, to get them to support all kinds of other really good things. It's getting better and better. Next. So that's what there's. I just said that. There you go. So
Yeah,
I think we can.
in a sense, the bottom line with an electric car, wherever you're driving it, and here in California, obviously, it's super clean compared to a gas car. But the first day you drive that car is its dirtiest day, because the grid is getting cleaner wherever you live over time. More and more renewable, more solar, more wind. So literally the fuel for the car is getting cleaner over time. And when you switch it out and get a new electric car, that one will be even cleaner.
So this is showing retired coal plants year after year after year. And then you're also seeing wind and solar. Look at the green and the yellow portion compared to the added natural gas. This is actually added capacity, generating capacity in 2016. And you can see it's huge. So again, every drop of oil that's extracted to fuel in a gas car is dirtier, more expensive, and more damaging than the prior drop. This is sort of the corollary to what Marc is saying.
And might I just add again with, again, not to push the environmental thing too much, but, you know, we're being told that we need to keep about 80% of our fossil fuels in the ground. This is one of the ways we can do it. So next.
And there we are.
Okay, so this is just to talk about how do you do the next thing. And I want to just say that this is very optional. You know, I teach behavioral science, and we can talk a little bit, and we're going to go through this really fast. So if you want to, you can learn how to set a goal. We always say, when I've been working in this field for so long, that knowledge is not behavior. You know, we can sit here and just keep taking it in, but how do you turn it into action? That's the trick. And there's actually behavioral science that can help you do that. One of the most important things is to learn how to set good goals. So on your page inside your handout, you can, Jim, go to the next, there we go. You'll see inside your handout is a huge, I think it's on page 4, if I'm remembering correctly. It's kind of huge. And if you want to, you can just learn this and try to see if it'll help you. But this is the basic technique. You want to stay specific and positive. You want to stay very behavioral, you know, not vague. For example, you know, something specific and behavioral is that I will test drive an EV on Saturday versus I'm never going to drive a gas car again. Okay,
Jane, I'd like to chime in. They've already taken the first step.
Okay, yes.
By coming here today.
Yes, yes. Yay, yay.
Yeah. Give yourselves a hand. It's awesome.
Absolutely.
You took the first step. The momentum is going now.
Yes, I stand corrected. Yes. And then you want to stay very reasonable, like a small step outside your comfort zone, not some huge thing, because that's how we do this. And you'll see that little by little, you'll get more and more comfortable with all this, and you'll keep going. I always say to put it in your planner or wherever you keep track of things, these kind of goals ought to be written down. So you can either take this thing and post it somewhere. You can, you know, put it in your phone, put it somewhere so that you're going to see it. And that's going to help you remember. Be a good scientist. What I mean by that is that run the experiment. When you set a goal, it's really a hypothesis. You're saying, this is what I think I can do. And so go ahead, run the experiment, and you'll adjust the goal as you need to. And finally, this last one is incredibly important, to please stay as compassionate with yourself as you can. Don't beat up on yourself. Don't have a critical inner voice that says, oh, you were bad, you didn't, finish that goal you said you were going to set, or you said you'd do it on Tuesday, and really you did it on Thursday. Don't have that voice. Really understand that everything you do is grist for the mill. So I'm going to invite you, those of you who want to go ahead and write down a goal, and we'll give you just a minute to do that, and then if you want to, just share a few after you're done. But if you'd like to just take this home with you and work on it, that's totally fine, because we're going to get to the questions in about 2 minutes. So let them have a moment to let's give them a minute. How many of you want to set a little goal in here before you leave? Let me just take would you rather we just get to the questions and skip this part? Okay, let's take it home with you, and we can certainly work with that. Okay. On your inside your handout, as I mentioned, there is this sheet that if you did give your email and you put it on the sign-in sheet, we will certainly be sending you this with its clickable links. We will not spam you or give your address to anyone. So
we may follow up in several months with a little check-in to see if you did in fact get an electric vehicle. Would that be okay? If not, let us know.
Right. Yeah. And if anybody, when we get to the Q&A, if anybody does want to just share one goal they know they'd like to start implementing after they leave here. We'd be happy to hear that. This is the daughter of Sven Thiessen, who I mentioned earlier, and she's just become an incredible advocate herself. So many of you are aware of Greta Thunberg, or Thunberg. I don't never know how to pronounce her name, but she's just become such a wonderful hero. The children are taking us by their hands. So, and without further ado.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing.
Yeah.
Sort of not car related, actually. About a year and a half ago, I got an electric bicycle. And I got to say, it really changed my life. Mm-hmm. I use my car a lot less. I use a lot less electricity to run my electric bicycle than I did my electric car. I live in San Francisco, so I actually get places faster than using a car or Muni. And I get some exercise. I mean, not a ton, but you do get exercise because you got to pedal when you use an electric bike. And the electric bike industry is just totally taking off. So if you've given any thought to it, consider an electric bike. I think on so many levels, it's really a great thing to do.
And let me just add to that, Mark, I'm so glad you brought that up, because not only are there electric bikes, there's electric scooters, and it's certainly part of the solution, and quite a bit cheaper, and and they don't take up as much space, so very good.
We're ready for questions.
Yes. All right, so what we suggested you do is write your questions on a card. And so we'll come down into the audience, or you can just raise your hand and we'll do it that way. Does anyone have a burning question that they wrote down? Yes.
Stand up so we can hear you.
Yeah, stand up. And I'll repeat the question, and if you...
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so he wanted to know about numbers on the battery and so forth and so on. Jim or Mark?
Well, let me just start by saying one good reason to lease a car is the battery warranty covers those 3 years, and the question about if the battery is going to become less efficient over time is not your concern, because at the end of 3 years, you're going to get a different car. In general, the car makers have a 7 or 8 year warranty on the batteries.
8 years. It's 8 years.
8 years. So that if it goes beneath a certain threshold, which I think is generally around 70% capacity.
80. 80.
You think 80?
80.
All right. He's really into proving me wrong. They'll replace the battery. And certainly there have been people, particularly with Nissan Leafs, that have had batteries replaced when the battery capacity got below the threshold within those 8 years. A battery like on your phone, it loses a little bit over time. I think Tesla has shown really pretty minimal battery degradation over time. It's an obviously correct question, but believe me, if batteries were conking out early on electric cars, and there are now about 1 million electric cars in this country and another 1 million or 2 million in other countries, we would know about it. And it's just generally not a problem.
I love that, American. And also just, as an example, I've had my car for 4 years. It is still getting 100 miles. And, yes, I ride a bike too, but it's doing really well. And I haven't noticed any difference in the, capacity. So I hope that helps a little bit.
So the other thing that I think to address is that the size of the battery matters.
Oh, and how you drive your car, right?
Well, not necessarily, but...
Oh, I thought if you drove it certain ways on the freeway.
Well, I'm kind of a lead foot, so... no, the larger batteries are... what I'll say is big batteries are durable batteries. That's your takeaway. So a car with a 20, like a 20 kilowatt hour battery, which would go about 80 miles, those batteries are more easily worn out by fast charging and hard acceleration and so forth than, say, a battery with 100 or 200 plus miles of range. The larger batteries spend much more time in their happy zone. So the one thing you have to understand is that the manufacturers realize, because they are forced actually by law to warrant this battery for 8 years or 100,000 miles, because it's part of the pollution control system. That's how the state required, or I think actually it's a federal level, required that these vehicles be manufactured and be covered. And so when the battery gauge says 100%, it's not really 100%. They're charging you maybe up to 90, 80, 90%. And then when it's down at 0%, if you ever go that far, you really still actually have about 10% state of charge in the battery. And if you were to treat your phone that way, you'd get much more battery life out of your phone. The phone would become obsolete long before the battery wears out. So the way the chemistry involved with lithium-ion batteries is such that the cars are designed to keep it in that happy zone. A larger battery spends more time in that happy zone, for lack of a better word.
Okay, Bill. I know Bill. Yeah.
It all depends on how often you. The small battery cars, I think they are probably the biggest impact is how often you fast charge it. So if you just charge it on your home charger, probably not going to be a problem. You'll probably get 10 years out of it. We can't say, because the cars have only been around for about 7 or 8 years. That's my understanding, yes. So Nissan was changing out batteries for, I think, $5,500 for the parts plus labor. So it's not cheap. We're not going to sit here and tell you, oh, you can get it for a couple of $100s. But if you factor in the maintenance that you would otherwise be performing on the same gas car, it actually turns out to be a wash. So if you look at how much maintenance, if you keep a gas car for 10 years, add up all the maintenance, all the money you spend on maintenance and time you spend on maintenance for that car, and it runs well into the thousands, and you've pretty much purchased a battery anyway. There haven't been too many batteries needing to be replaced. I know the one on the Ford is a lot more expensive. It was like $13,000. It was, you might as well just give them the car back at that point. But again, those, if they fail, are covered under warranty. They don't fail catastrophically. If they do fail catastrophically, that's covered under warranty. For capacity loss, it's pretty hard to buy a car now or lease a car without at least 120 miles, right? I don't think they're selling any sub 100-mile cars. I think the only one is the Honda Clarity battery electric car, and that's like 90 miles.
Yeah, I think the important point here is just what Jim said. The batteries don't fail catastrophically, right? It's not like, I don't really know gas cars that well, but I mean, your valve's going out or something that you have to replace, or the car won't go. In fact, it's going to taper off. And so the question is, what works for you? So if the car was a 100-mile range car, but the most you drive in a day is 30 miles, after 8 years, you're still going to be fine. And if the car now goes 65 miles, it's still going to be fine. So it's really about, the car and your use case.
Go ahead and use it all you need to.
Right, you don't have to
Don't
restrict.
Drive the daylights out of it, really. Driving it is not going to hurt it.
Keep it between 20 and 80% if you can. But use the car the way you want to, and then deal with the problems later.
Okay, how about, let's give a woman a chance just for a moment, sir. Is there any ladies in the, yes, ma'am, way back in the corner. We'll get back to you.
That is a great question, and I don't know that anyone at this point makes an adaptive car that works for that, and they ought to. And I'm going to ask some people some questions about that, because I had a veteran recently ask me about a similar question, because veterans who get adaptive cars that are adaptive to whatever their disability might be can get some extra incentives from the government to pay for the car. And I think I should know more about this, so thank you for asking the question.
What
It's
about
an excellent question.
Kia Soul? Would Kia Soul be tall enough for that?
No, no. I actually did do a little research. I actually started. So, of course, the ideal car, and the car they should have electrified in the very beginning, in my opinion, would have been the minivan, right? And so I started looking around at companies. I basically did some search on the internet, on Google, and looked around at companies that did the van modifications. And there was one that modified a Chrysler Pacifica. And I said, oh, great. And I called them up and I talked to them and I said, when are you going to do the hybrid? And they said, we can't. The battery's in the wrong place. Precludes cutting the floor. And I was like, I was heartbroken, because you're not the only person I'm aware of in this situation, and I really, really want everybody to be able to, experience the joy of driving electric. Go ahead.
Yes.
Of course. You don't have your own meter on your unit? That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. Mm-hmm. Right, right. Honestly, I don't know the answer to that one. It's a very good question.
We can
That's
tell,
fine.
and what we're glad.
We like it, actually.
We love that.
Oh, and I want to touch on, you brought up the question about power failures and the power outages and of course.
Power outages.
So personal experience, I know of exactly 0 people, and I know a lot of EV drivers who were impacted by this power failure because we had enough notice. And anytime there's a power outage of any consequence, one that's predictable, even if it's going to be a number of days, we all just made sure we charged our vehicles in advance, and it was a big non-issue. I do know of one couple who took a trip to Half Moon Bay and was going to go down the coast and realized that, oh, the gas pumps in Half Moon Bay aren't working. Oh, I guess we have to go back over 92 and go home because we didn't have the ability to fill our car. So I actually went out and I bought a inverter specifically for the purpose where if they decided to shut me down, I know that I can run my fridge for a little over a week on the battery in my Chevrolet Bolt. And so that was my plan, is I've got all the wiring and everything ready to go. So I plan to actually use my car to power my house. We're not messing around.
Excellent. All right. These are great questions. Sir, I said you could thank you for being a gentleman. What's your question? Mm-hmm. Nissan had that, didn't they?
That's a good question. So if it depends on the manufacturer, because they all speak a different language on their OBD port. They don't have a standard protocol. For example, if you have a Nissan you're looking at, you would use the Leaf Spy app. You have to be somewhat of a propeller head to actually download and install the software on an Android tablet or something, and then have the Wi-Fi adapter and all that. For the GM products, the Bolt, the Volt, the Spark, there's this thing called Torque Pro. You can download it to an Android device and then connect it to an OBD dongle and see your capacity. So I know the capacity of both my GM cars and the state of their health, the state of battery health. So there, you Google it for the model you're considering. Definitely, if you're technically inclined, but it's a big learning curve.
All right, so just wanted to say we have time for one last question, and then out in the lobby, I'm sure that if you guys can hang out for a little bit, that the audience will.
We're available in the lobby, no problem. We'll stay as long as until every question is answered.
We will, and as we said, we are also communicable. We have a website, and we have ways to get in touch with us. So, know that you're being definitely supported. Who's got a final question?
Sorry, but before we get to, and also please make sure that you submit your surveys. We very much want to hear everyone's feedback on the event. And thank you for coming.
Right.
Thanks, Doug.
Did you have a question?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's terrible. I'm not gonna mince words here. That said, the size of the battery again has a very significant impact on resale value, right? So on depreciation. So a car that starts off with 80, 90 miles of range is going to lose its value a lot quicker than a car with 200 plus miles of range. And of course, from 100 to 200, it's iffy. If it's in the high 100s, more likely. But the big battery cars, they're holding their value just fine. So if you're concerned about resale value and you're thinking about a tiny battery car, lease it. And again, it's a really good deal. My son, I have firsthand experience. My son fell into the need for a daily driver, right? He needed a car he could drive every day between Palo Alto and De Anza. And I said, what are you going to get? Maybe a Ford Ranger pickup or some other gas car so you can haul your mountain bikes around. I was ready for him to do that. He says, Dad, I just drove Mom's van around for a week and a half and spent $90 in gas. Forget that. I'm going to get a Spark. I said, okay. So we got him a car that started out with like 80, 90 miles of range, and now it's got 70 or 80 miles of range. And of course, now he put high-performance tires, so it's more like low 70s. But it's his car, and he's cool with it, and he takes it all over the place. He makes regular trips to Santa Cruz in it. It's just a perfectly usable vehicle for him, and he's happy because fuel is effectively free, and there's almost no maintenance.
And Jim is happy because he doesn't have to worry about him going too far with 70-mile range.
Yeah, well, I'd loan him my car if he really needed to.
All right, you guys, thank you so much for coming out and caring about this topic. Yeah. Thank you, City of Sunnyvale.